The story is told of a king who was growing old and preparing himself to die. The problem he had was the same problem that many kings have encountered over the centuries. He had no heir. So instead of taking one of his noblemen and announcing that he was going to be the next emperor, he decided on something kind of unique. He sent his people out into his kingdom to gather in 20 young men. He said, "Bring them to me, and one of them will be the king." So they went far and wide, gathered whoever they could find, and chose among them. And they brought 20 boys back to the king. And he called them all to himself, and he said, "I'm old, I have no heir, but one of you will be the next king." They were all kind of excited. Some of them, mumbling and kind of looking around, puffing up their chest, deciding who was going to be the guy that would get chosen. And he said, "Okay, so here's how I'm going to decide. I'm going to give each of you a seed. I want you to take it home. I want you to plant it in a pot. I want you to tend it. And 6 months from now, I'll bring you back, and I want you to show me what you have grown." So all the boys did that. And one boy in particular, a very poor young man, went home and excitedly told his mother. She couldn't believe it. He said, "I might be the next king." And so she said, "Okay, well, let's take this pot. Let's plant it." So he did. And his mother helped him, and he did everything that he was supposed to do. He heard tales of the other boys and plants that were beginning to grow and how excited they were, and trees that were growing, and flowers that were growing, and bushes that were growing. And yet he looked at his, and there was nothing. It was a pot of dirt with a seed stuck somewhere down inside of it. And he kept on watering. He kept on tilling it. He would fertilize it. 3 months went by, 4 months, 5 months. Nothing grew. So he told his mother he wasn't even going to show up. He wouldn't go back when they were called back because he was too humiliated. He just knew all the other boys had something better than he did. He had heard what they were saying, what people were saying about them, how excited they were because they just knew that they were going to be picked. But his mother said, "No, the king will understand. He asked you to do this. You did what he asked you to do. Just go." So he did, and he went, and of all the boys that went in there with all their trees and impressive bushes and flowers, he just kind of stood to the back, set his pot on the floor, and hung his head. So the king walked into the room and said, "As I have promised you, one of you will be the next king." And he began to look around, and he admired the trees and how neatly trimmed they were, how strong those trunks had grown just in 6 short months. And the beautiful flowers that had grown, the bushes, everything that these young men were just so proud of. And then he walked around and looked, and he finally caught a glimpse through the other boys and the plants of that boy in the back with his head hung low. And he looked, and he saw a pot that had nothing in it but dirt. And he summoned him. He said, "Bring that boy to me." So he brought him up front, didn't say a word, turned him around, and said, "Behold, your king." And all the other boys were shocked. This boy especially was shocked. Why did he pick me? I'm a failure. And he looked at the other boys and said, "You see, the seeds that I gave you were boiled in water. They were dead. They could not possibly have grown what you're showing me here. But this boy, he not only had the courage to come back, he had the integrity to be honest and to give me the fruit of what I had given him." David speaks a lot about standing in his integrity. Paul teaches us not to measure ourselves against other people, but to measure ourselves against Christ is the only legitimate standard. See, there's a lot of people that put on a lot of show. Look at me. Look what God has done for me. Look at me. Look what I have done because God has done this through me. And we're tempted sometimes to look at ourselves and count ourselves as insignificant, count ourselves as failures, when all along the growth, the maturity, and the integrity that God has desired from us with the seed that is the Word of God that He has planted in us, it makes an inward change. Jesus condemned the Pharisees of the day. because he said you're like whitewashed tombs. It's all pretty on the outside, but on the inside, it's full of dead man's bones. They lacked integrity. Take what God has given you. Take what God has planted to you. Don't be caught up in the delusion of the physical, but enjoy the fruitfulness of the spiritual.